lot of its funding. And we know that NASA doesn't necessarily have the funding structure to support a lot of these kinds of things directly, which is why we're talking about it now, because it's really important to start to think about additional funding sources that could complement NASA funding if a campaign like this is to be funded. The other thing I want to mention is another paper that I think really emphasizes the human dimensions component of this, and thinking about capacity building, as Dana just mentioned. There's a need to train capacity or capacity build and train the next generation to carry out the science, but also to think about the world we live in. And I know I am thinking big and bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's so important. There's an opportunity to promote and I think propose science that can reinvent or reimagine how we think about how people and these ecosystems interact. This is a really nice paper, just kind of spotlighting that and emphasizing that. And I think it's something to think about in the training component. So I'm going to run through a handful of thoughts shared during the Cameroon workshop, which we'll emphasize again tomorrow. So I'm going to go briefly through this, but there's a real desire from the community in sub-Saharan Africa to focus on training the next generation of African scientists to become researchers, technicians, government employees. And this requires going beyond just data collection. So training people to write manuscripts, write grant proposals, engage in the research from start to finish, and become leaders. Also encouraging, again, collaboration between researchers and practitioners within the region, enhancing understanding of differences and similarities across the tropics, advancing monitoring capabilities, supporting research exchange across the tropics. And a big thing that came out of the Cameroon workshop, as soon as they heard about LBA, and many people had never heard of LBA, there was this really deep interest in hearing more. What was learned? How did you actually accomplish LBA? What new data emerged? What modeling advances? What monitoring capabilities? What capacities resulted from LBA that could serve as a model for something like PANGEA? So with that, I'll hand it over to Michael, who's going to talk a little bit about capacity building from the perspective of lessons learned during LBA.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Okay, we've seen the title slide, and we've seen this slide too. There were a lot of students trained in LBA. There were a lot of scientists involved. But exactly what did we do that made it work? That I think it's not simply an add money question. You know, you have to add money, but you also have to add money judiciously. And so these were ready, set, go. These were some of the types of activities that we engaged in. And it's a short list because it's hard to talk about very long lists, but these are some of the top items. Undergraduate internships. This is like, you know, the training academies for football teams, right? We could spot the talented young researchers who, you know, then went into graduate programs, and it worked really well. I don't know whether other countries do this, but Brazil has a formal process called research. What do they call them? No, it's the undergraduate research fellowships. Yes, and so sorry, I lost that for a minute. And these interns, you know, put 20 hours a week into their work and do it for a semester or whatever, and get involved in research projects. And it works, you know, really incredibly well. It's a formal program, and we took great advantage of it. Master's and PhD scholarships, many of which were paid for by Brazilian agencies and not necessarily specifically for LBA. In fact, the agencies fought back against saying, oh, we're not going to just pile on the money to LBA. You guys have a lot of money anyway. And so what we did was a ground up program. It's kind of like guerrilla warfare. We just got good students. A lot of them came out of those undergraduate internships to write fellowship proposals. and just hand them in. And, you know, they had good advisors, at least some of them did, and not mine, right? But they had some good advisors, and they put in these fellowship proposals. And sure enough, you know, we could go through the normal routes and get people funded, and we didn't have to get a special allocation. Eventually, we did get a small special allocation, but just the normal route made a huge, great difference. We supplemented some of those in cases by like bringing people to the US or sending them to Europe, other places for short time periods, a year, a semester, less, just to get that experience, and that kind of recognition. Of course, we also had postdoctoral fellowships. We had student-led conferences. And, you know, I mean, you're a foreign student in an international program. It's intimidating. And when you organize your own conference and you're in charge, it's a lot less intimidating. So we got people to get out there and show their stuff. And those were really fun and really exciting. We invested in some laboratory improvements, not only because we wanted to improve capacity, but because we wanted to do our work more effectively and more efficiently. It's a lot different shipping your samples down the road than it is shipping them overseas, right? And so small investments for equipment, training, et cetera, could pay off in really big ways. And in a few cases, we made some infrastructure improvements, which again, were done primarily to make our work cheaper. Because if you're constantly breaking trucks, that's very expensive. So it's cheaper to fix a road than it is to fix a lot of trucks all the time. So what did this, try again. There it goes. What did this result in? It resulted in a huge contribution from the capacity that we built into the products, the research products that we had. And I chose as research product publications because those are easier to count than other things. And what this graph shows is just the percentage of research publications per year from that NASA terrestrial ecology funded group. There's 667 publications between 1998 and 2010 that are in this list. And we show the percent of student authorships, which increased through the program, as you might expect. The percent of Brazilian first, these are first authors, the percent of Brazilian first authorships, and the percent of Brazilian student first authorships, all of which increased from the beginning until the end of the program. And I think this represents, you know, one dimension of our success. The other dimension of our success is that, you know, then people went on to do great things. One of the great things that happened in Brazil post LBA, and it wasn't anything we planned, and it wasn't something that LBA did, was a program called Mapiomas. Mapiomas is a program for mapping land use change in all of Brazil, not just Amazonia. And Mapiomas is run by, at least in part, a large part, a whole bunch of people who did PhDs as part of LBA. Now, these are 5 of the top Mapiomas leaders. They're all LBA and LBA related PhDs, and, you know, internationally famous scientists besides. So, you know, this is the type of thing that through this tiny investment made for these, you know, to train these people, turned into something really amazing and spectacular. And Mapiomas is now taking what they've learned and extending it to other countries. Mapiomas is doing Mapiomas in other Amazonian countries. Mapiomas is doing Mapiomas in Indonesia, and they're doing it with you know, Indonesians. They're not taking Brazilians to do the land cover of Indonesia. They're training Indonesians to do what they learned how to do in Brazil. So I think, that train the trainer sort of thing has worked out spectacularly well. This is one really great example, but there are others. And overall, this is the kind of thing that, I think we'd like to see more of. So what were the key mechanisms that made this work from my perspective? Partnership, and my perspective represents at least 10 years as I was called the co-chair for life of the LBA International Science Steering Committee, because the chair rotated every year, but I stayed co-chair for 10 years. And the scientific steering committee was the beating heart of the LBA experience in a lot of ways, and I'll show you a few of the ways that we were involved. One is that every project in LBA had a requirement to have partnerships. You couldn't have somebody parachuting in, taking their data away, and going away and declaring victory and publishing their papers. Every outside investigator had a partner, and we made an emphasis to, as much as possible, have partnerships as equals. So your partner couldn't be some institute director who just signed your papers, and your partner couldn't be your graduate student, right? Because that's a coercive kind of, potentially coercive kind of relationship. Your partner needed to be an equal researcher. And, that was a big challenge sometimes, because we had people who said, well, I don't have a partner, so we had some forced marriages, some of which worked better than others. Capacity building was a requirement. Oh, and some of the agencies tried to enforce this, but other funding agencies said it's none of our business. We just give out money based on the proposal quality, right? And so the International Science Steering Committee analyzed every proposal to make sure that, as much as possible, we could say we had equal partners. Capacity building. All LBA projects had to have we call it training and education component. And again, the International Science Steering Committee analyzed every project. And what we looked for was to try to see that the capacity being built was proportional to sort of the investment made. Some projects were small, they might have an undergraduate involved. Some projects were large, they might have a half a dozen students and postdocs involved. So, it was subjective evaluation, but, we evaluated all the projects and argued about them. LBA, for those who are uninformed, actually stands for long, bloody arguments. Okay. Capacity building led to the establishment of actually new MS and PhD programs in Brazil. And I take no credit for that at all. I don't think that was a foreign initiative. That was a Brazilian initiative where people were being, raised up in their careers. They said, well, we need our own students. We need our own programs. And those programs were formed. Okay, part two of key mechanisms, and then I'll be wrapping up. There we go. Data sharing. LBA had a data policy that was open, and I would say daring for its day. Okay, these days it wouldn't look very daring. But data sharing was monitored by the project offices. Data sharing was required as part of the proposals that the International Science Steering Committee evaluated. And unfortunately, one of our lessons was that the stick worked better than the carrot. If in the funding agencies that actually monitored whether data was being shared, there was a lot more data sharing that happened than funding agencies that just didn't have the capacity to do that, or didn't have the wherewithal, or maybe didn't care. So there's an investment that needs to be made to make sure that this happens. Hopefully, you know, this is much more of our culture now than it was 25 years ago when LBA started, and it happens more automatically, but open data is still sometimes a problem. Investments that NASA made included some support for key laboratories and some key infrastructure. It was, you know, really surgically applied to try to get the most leverage, because most of the funding really went to pay people. Yeah. Right. And then finally, as I said, we had this international committee that worked really hard in order to monitor all this stuff. And it was a big challenge and it was a big effort. So I think the next slide is guidelines for our discussions, and oops, I went too fast. Back. Too far back. Now we got it.
All right. All right. Thank you, folks. So now I think we're going to have an open discussion, which might involve some moving mics around the room here. I guess I did wonder if in the mentioning of Bioscape and all the effort that went into capacity building there, Woody, if you would be interested in saying a word or two about those experiences as we start to open it up. We'll be talking about what do we mean by capacity building and who should we be focusing on, but I'd be interested in your kind of initial thoughts on how that.
Yeah, I mean, for Bioscape, I give the PIs, Adam and Aaron, a huge bit of credit in that they started from the outset to understand what led to parachute science and how to avoid it. And they had an AGU meeting on parachute science. They went out of their way to deliberately avoid. They of course started. I mean, the proposal when it first came in for Bioscape was joint between Adam Wilson and Jasper Slingsby, who was then at Sion, now at University of Cape Town. So there was partnership at the outset. I think you guys have that. That's critical. And they listened to those partners well. And you've got to start it early and often, including students. I think we ended up with about 50-50 in terms of US, South African participation. If we worked it right, there will be far more South African papers and other African papers coming out of Bioscape than there will be American papers of the next generation. The South African teams brought a lot of students to bear. Our teams had South African students on them as well. And so, we're shorter than LBA, we're shorter than above, 3 years total. So that's, you're running fast for that. But planning to have that capacity element is key. And then partnering with the right people in wherever countries you're going to go is key. So the sooner you know that, the better, and the better off you'll be in terms of establishing the types of things that Michael's been talking about. Yeah, LBA I think was impressive in terms of what it was able to do for an entire cohort of Brazilian and other Amazonian researchers. So yeah, we looked at that and tried to emulate it in a smaller scale as best we could. But there was great leadership from the outset, and just making sure that this wasn't sort of the top-down north on south approach. It was a north and south approach.
Great, thank you. Does anyone want to kind of chime in? All right, excellent.
Thank you. So I think that what you have to do, capacity building is one of the main components for Africa. We need capacity building. For that, I think that you have to identify precisely which area of capacity we need. Because there is a student, the students, they are here. But the other problem is how to train them. It's insufficient capacity, expertise to train them. Maybe you have to train professors who will help them to have this capacity. Is the lack of expertise. The second one is also the lack of infrastructure. So you have to develop infrastructure for that. If you have student, you have professor, they need infrastructure. So you have to develop it also. And for that, you need funding. So funding, I think that is the key of everything. So we need that to develop this capacity building mainly in Africa. So we need it. So it's a huge and important component of what we need.
Thank you. And did you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I am Landing Man, director of OSFAC. OSFAC is a satellite observatory of Central African forest.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Tim Philly. I'm at University of Oklahoma. We had a longstanding program in Peru where we worked with national universities in Peru. And it was about capacity building through co-creation of collaborative research projects. But the thing that made it happen was that the university had support from the highest level. So at the time when we started that, it was after a push in Peru for the national universities to create research programs and to become international universities. So offices of vice presidents for research were new, they were just created. And so the presidents and these new vice presidents basically had a mission to transform the university and then support these new labs that we helped to create, these new projects that we helped to create, thinking long into the future. And it wasn't peer-to-peer. I mean, it was peer-to-peer relationships, but it was peer-to-peer relationships that were supported at the highest level of the university, which are going to house those new labs and those new student cohorts. And so without that, it doesn't become long-lived. So I think that that kind of background to find out who are those universities that want to buy in is really important. And then what kind of capital they have on their own that they can leverage from their state or regional or federal governments.
My name is Álvaro Duque. I'm from Colombia and I work at the National University. And I think building capacity is giving responsibility to the locals, you see, and supporting them to accomplish with that. And responsibilities is not only data taking, you see, in the field. It's also helping them to accomplish with academic goals. And I think this is the way we grow. I see several people here that they are still helping me a lot and have helped a lot of my graduate, undergrad, and master students at the same time as part of a project. Yeah, it's for instance, my case in Macayaco, but if you give responsibilities to the locals and you help them to accomplish but academic responsibilities. 30 years ago, carrying on the bags of Al Gentry, it was an honor for any of us. Going to the field with Al Gentry and just carrying the plants, that was the maximum thing we could have. But times are changing. And now we don't want to be only the 150 co-author in a very nice paper. We want our students to be the first authors. So I think this is a very good way to build capacity in the global south, giving responsibilities and helping them to accomplish with them.
So I just want to echo what was just said. So capacity building, my name is Ashutosh Lima. I work for Servier, which is part of capacity building program at NASA. I share the sentiment of collective European colleagues of ours who don't like the word capacity building, which assumes a one-directional street, and it is a bi-directional street. And as Simon mentioned in our breakout downstairs, there is value in knowledge sharing, capacity building. That happens from all sides, and the indigenous knowledge, the local expertise, how that can be brought up. I think that is also part of the capacity building for the scientific community at large. So thank you, sir.
We'll go to Teodoro.
Oh, I'm Theodore Quinchua I'm with World Resources Institute, and actually want to start with what you just where you ended. I know in Kenya they are piloting a very innovative initiative with the Wangari Maathai Earth Foundation, and one thing that they are trying to do there is to have indigenous people serve not just as data providers, but as assessors for students. So the process is that when a student is about to do the viva, that in the panel, in the jury, you have some IP leaders, which forces the student to write the thesis in such a manner that makes sense for indigenous people leaders. So to me, there's a critical element there in ensuring that we don't have an extractive process, but that we teach students in making sure that the knowledge that they produce makes sense and that they are actually assessed by others. And expanding on that, I believe one thing that we've been missing a lot in these conversations is the connection with those who make decisions. So, right, so we are good at having good theses that will just sit in our libraries. We are good at having good papers that will just be published in international journals, and very few researchers are capable of writing simple policy briefs that can inform a precise intervention or that can inform action on the ground by decision makers. And I do believe that's a very important and unique skills that should be taken into consideration when we discuss capacity building. So it should not just be about understanding the big systems, but really understanding the people and what matters for those who can action the kind of data that we are generating.
Okay.
We also have a hand up, and I'm gonna come to the meeting chat here, but Raphael, did you want to
First, we
unmute?
have one in here.
Oh,
and then I'll
okay,
go to you.
sorry.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm Raphael Chimanga. Yeah, so I would like actually to intervene on capacity building. So the term capacity building to me, it can be understood differently from place to place. And it can have also different meaning. And for that, really, we need to proceed with capacity building need assessment so that we can, capture the real need of people. For instance, when you're talking about capacity building for the Amazon basin, so people in the Congo basin will have another understanding, different needs, different requirements for capacity building. It can focus on, building the capacity of individuals, providing them with a conducive environment, equipment, laboratories, and so on. But so when we are in Amazon, it could have also another level, So for that, really, we need to proceed with capacity building need assessment, and this could be an exercise we do during this meeting, so that we identify what could be the need for capacity building with regard to different thematic areas and with regard to different regions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm Simon Tamunga, a visiting scholar from Calvin University, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and head of Department of Forestry and Wildlife Technology in the University of Bamenda, Cameroon. Just want to add to the previous speaker who said capacity building may be limited to individuals. I'm also a member of the community engagement group. And I think that we can also, not only limiting to individuals, but also communities that may need such capacity building. I want to add to what my colleague there said about lack of finance and infrastructure, especially in the Congo Basin. I want to add that one way of ensuring that the goals are met and for sustainability is to identify, you may call them PANGEA excellence centers. And these should be universities that meet certain minimum requirements. So PANGEA should survey some universities with minimum requirements and negotiate with them, maybe through MOU, and give them conditions that they have to satisfy, which would be a win-win arrangement. And in that case, they identify, there should be a system of identifying those people who are going to be built the capacity type of capacities and so on. On the basis of that, then there will be those institutions and perhaps these groups that are working with in groups, some people, some strategic people who are involved in groups, to monitor or evaluate what they're doing and report to PANGEA as insiders of both the universities and PANGEA. In that case, they will be sure of what they are doing because they are working as they defend the university and they will also defend the interests of PANGEA in them, rather than just going to a university that does not even have any link with PANGEA and so on. So what I want to say is that some baseline survey should be made for the establishment of excellence centers, called them PANGEA excellence centers, where capacities can be built. Thank you.
Just a quick comment on that too. There's existing efforts that I think we could leverage, like for example, the Congo Basin Science Initiative, which is starting to identify some of those centers of excellence. We had some questions over here. Okay.
Quick, very specific point about this leverage already associations, ATBC, Association for Tropical Biology or Conservation Biology, already have a lot of workshops and conferences in places that I think rarely we go and we see science, cutting edge science sort of being promoted. And so anyways, I participated in several of them and learned so much as a student, as a scientist later on. And also work with these associations, maybe even to think about special issues. I benefited, a lot of LBA folks benefited from special issues on certain topics that you had editors much more in tune with the realities of the region, the knowledge, and not very picky about certain aspects of the science, and really promoted and helped students to publish their papers.
I think I can find a mic. Can you hear me? So just on the special issues, it's something we're toying with, the idea of a special issue related to PANGEA. Again, we can talk more about this in the third day session about making the most out of the scoping process, but there's been some discussion among working groups about the idea of a special issue. So we'll come back to that.
Hello, my name is Paul Arellano. I am from Northern Arizona University. I am from Ecuador and I have been working on the Amazon region and the Andean region for a long period of time. And in this topic related to capacity building, this is going to be a research project. Of course, the natural partner for these projects for capacity building should be the research institutes. Let's say universities, of course. But there are another actors, another stakeholders that they are in charge to administrate, to manage those lands. They say, let's say the Amazon region. And they are the local governments and also the regional governments. And we can add another one, these national institutes, let's say the environmental ministries of the countries and another institution related to manage, control, and administrate those areas. Then I consider also they should be taken into account at the time when a capacity building program is going to be thinking for the project.
Is this working? Okay. Two thoughts. One is just a thought that in some contexts where PANGEA may be implemented, people have limited access to funds to educate all of their children. So sometimes they'll choose to invest in the education of like male children instead of female children. And so that's one thought. That related to that thought is so far, especially with the presentations on LBA, we've been talking about undergrads, master's students, and PhD students, how to work with early career scientists. One thing that we've been discussing within the working group is how can we engage with citizen scientists who may or may not pursue a career in science
and non-scientists. And on that second point, another thought about like different contexts in which PANGEA may be implemented. We were also discussing drivers of deforestation and forest change, how that may be different in different geographic contexts. I mean, in some places, maybe private sector is responsible, but in Africa, there have been several studies that show that agricultural expansion is a driver of forest change, the leading driver. And it's sort of thinking about like, who do we target for capacity building? What local communities, what knowledge do local communities have that they could potentially contribute into PANGEA if they had capacity building or tools for participation? Like, for example, non-scientists like farmers, or may have a lot of knowledge about land use, climate, precipitation, so on and so forth. And we could have capacity building efforts that target farmers, that target women citizen scientists or potential scientists before undergraduate, like maybe through youth clubs or something. I don't know. But just two small considerations about when do we engage in capacity building, like at what educational level, and we could sort of broaden participation by also targeting capacity building with non-scientists.
Hello, my name is Victor Maque. I am from the University of Oklahoma. I just want to add up to what Tim Philly said before. We've been working with research-based collaborations with many universities in Peru for the last 7 years. And in that process, some of the things that we've learned is that institutionally structured collaborations have a lot more chance for sustainability, that are agreements between universities and universities, not just faculty and faculty, but institutional agreements between universities. And that also, it's important to differentiate many of the universities in Latin America, for instance, Peru or Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, are very different. Universities in the capital cities tend to have a lot more better development and research. And the rest of universities in the country tend to be more teaching universities. And so taking in account those differences are very important, because capacity building is about also emphasizing the sharing of knowledge and technology for the larger country. So allowing faculty, especially early career faculty in the universities in the country, that can facilitate training of students, undergrad and grad students, and postdocs to be involved in the projects. I think that was very important. And the second aspect of that is university to university, institution to institution collaborations are fundamental, but also the connection between local universities and some of the agencies that Paul has mentioned, like the government agencies working on the environment and climate, water quality, and things like that. The connection between universities and the local actors, generating that facilitates not only training the next scientists for the university, for the academia, but also for these institutions. Like LBA, Michael mentioned, right? How you can see in Brazil, any institution you go, there's some connection with the LBA. And they even created a new university in Ufopa in Para region. With majority of faculty in that university are alumni from LBA. So that is possible to do with institutions, with institution to institution and government agencies at a local level.
Okay. Yes, I think the previous participant maybe take some of the idea that I wanted to say, but I think I need to put emphasis on not only on the earlier career scientists, but also on the mid-career scientists. Because sometimes when you have your PhD, 10 years later, you have knowledge of what you do during your PhD, and then, I mean, the technology, the methodology are evolving, but sometimes you do not have only the time to be recycling on those. I think thinking of those mid-career is something that is important. And then when my colleague was speaking about, I would say, training the farmer, I think you put it well by saying, okay, we need to think on those who are, I mean, are working on government and so on. But I think that is one important point, because we are generating knowledge that will be used by some of those people. And then if they do not understand our language, probably that they will not consume our product. So thinking of those people that are really, I would say, not really those who are taking the decision, but those who are technicians, and then giving advice to those who are taking the decision, is something that we need to probably have in mind, and then explore if we need to put emphasis on it or not. So that is one important point. And then the last one is, I was noting that maybe we need some sort of co-supervision of master and PhD students, because I was reflecting on how we can avoid brain drain from, I will say, from the south to the global south to the global north, because that is something that we probably need to think on, and then explore the better way to bring, I will say, the capacity that we may have on the global north to really support those who are, I would say, in the global south, really build this capacity, and then make in such a way that the capacity remain there to really provide some changes without, I would say, be a constraint on the mobility. Mobility is good, but at the same time, we also need to have some sort of the critical masses in terms of the science in the global south to be able to have some sort of the transformation.
It's like you were reading my mind, Denis. I was gonna just mention something briefly that was shared in the chat on Zoom, which is coming back to this brain drain. So, it's kind of a prompt before we go to another question for folks who have been involved in LBA. The comment was, in addition to training, we have to find a way to hire and retain trained people working in the tropics to avoid this brain drain issue. So are there quickly any insights from LBA that could speak to things that did work or didn't work to reduce brain drain? People leaving their countries after being trained and never coming back to contribute.
I didn't work on LBA, of course, but I did spend a year working in Madagascar. And one thing that I noticed is that there are significant pay gaps between sometimes researchers coming from the global north and working, for example, in Madagascar, and researchers based in Madagascar. I suspect that if those pay gaps were more, if pay was just more equitable or more closely linked to skill, regardless of the nationality of the researcher, that brain drain thing would solve itself. I mean, it was so sort of extreme in some cases that, like, even researchers from Madagascar who'd gone to the global north and came back still weren't paid at the same level as a researcher, for example, from the United States or from the UK.
So speaking specifically to LBA insights here now. Thanks, Adia. No, that's great.
So at the beginning of LBA, before we even had our first big sort of science workshop, which would be the equivalent maybe of this, we had a training and education workshop, which had about 25 people in it. And we asked, what's our plan? We need to, produce more people to work on this. It's going to be a big program. We came up with a plan that said we would have maybe by the end of the, period of the project, which at that point was still contemplated to be about a decade, about 50 masters and PhDs. So we greatly underestimated. Now, did those people stay? The vast majority did, but it really depended upon Brazilian government policies. What you heard about, that there were new masters and PhD programs that made a big difference that, we heard about UFOPA, they hired a lot of people, but they didn't hire 500 people. Those people went all sorts of places, including, NGOs, including local governments, including regional governments, including national governments. So it's actually, the people, including the private sector, people that we trained are doing wonderful jobs working for, paper companies and having a better survey of eucalyptus plantations. If you don't like that, it's okay. You can stop using toilet paper, right? But it's one of these things. It moves the economy, and people are doing all sorts of things. And I think, it's really, you can't say a research program is going to cause an economic transformation. And you need to have an entire package, but the research program can provide the, part of the seed for that. It's really up to a bigger forces is my main point.
Yeah, I feel more comfortable talking while standing. I'm Moses Libala. I work for the University of Yaoundé 1 in Cameroon. Just to take up from where Michael ended, I think I know where brain drain cannot happen. If they train the local communities, so capacity building with the local, the indigenous people, brain drain could hardly happen at that level. What I want to mention, I was having the microphone and she mentioned already, Aija mentioned some of them already, is maybe we should start looking at capacity building in the context of PANGEA. So if we say capacity building, it's like too wide, and it's like we are talking that we want to train engineers, road constructors, and all whatnot. I think that is still capacity building. But in the context of PANGEA, we should look at what PANGEA could produce. What could PANGEA do? And then in that sense, what are the products that could come out, or that PANGEA, I don't know, scientists or those working in PANGEA could give? And that is where we can capitalize on capacity building. To my understanding, capacity building is transfer of knowledge and competence. So if PANGEA could, it's able to maybe do things on aeronautics, then they can train or could transfer that competence to different communities or people. So if we look at the products of PANGEA, then we can now target the capacity, I don't know how to call it, those to be trained. So we can now target the community, and we can now put them in different, at different levels, beginning from government agencies to scientists. We are talking mostly about masters and scientists or researchers, undergrads and so on, and also going down to the local community. So those living in the areas that will be impacted. So that is how I see capacity building. We are not able, I don't think PANGEA will be able to train those who want to build aircrafts.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, is it my turn now? Oh, no, thanks. I'm Moses Cho from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa, and also a professor at the University of Pretoria, principally a remote sensing scientist. From my experience, what I would suggest PANGEA should do is to really build this collaboration with different institutions. For example, if you do that with the University of Pretoria, the CSIR, that will give us leverage to even access local funding. And I see sandwich programs, let's say with the University of Yaoundé or Bamenda, we could then build those collaborations, and it would be easier or cheaper even to train postgraduate students on that those sorts of arrangement. It's worked for me over many years. I think it really needs, that institution to institution discussions, MOU signed, and that kind of stuff. And then to provide funding for the students to participate in the fieldwork campaign, attending conferences, sandwich programs, and all of that, I think will really create the environment for capacity building. Some of us, we are more than prepared to participate in that sense. Thanks.
Well, I just want to say that any person you train in the tropics in the global south is going to have a multiplicative effect on that society. Well, this is my experience. I stayed in Colombia. You have to pay a cost in terms of your academic achievements and so on and so on. But socially, you have such a big impact that it rewards you in many, many different ways. So investing in training in our societies is the best thing you can do to change lives. It doesn't matter if you are investing on 2, 3, or hundreds of people. It will be better. But if you can, of course, change a couple of lives, they are going to help changing many other lives. And this is what you are witnessing now in Brazil. So just try to do your best helping people in our countries, trying to be a company in terms of education. That's what we need. We need money invested in education because that's what we don't have. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. It's me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, either one. Sorry.
I'm the first or just let it. I can. Okay, thank you. So I'm Farrell Ndigu from Agios, Gabon. I also work in remote sensing geomatic, applying to forest monitoring, especially to monitoring of public policies assessment using special data. My question joined the intervention of Moses about what exactly do we mean by capacity building. I think the question is clear. What are the possibilities offered by PANGEA in terms of capacity building? Because as Moses said, I don't think the possibilities are infinite. It is already something specific identified for capacity building according to PANGEA goals or topics. For me, capacity building efforts could support methodology transfers about production of local data linked to PANGEA topics. Because sometimes in our countries, we have many ideas about to produce data, very useful, but the capacity to do it misses. I have many ideas and to illustrate it because, and I think it's very important to have a kind of investigation and try to identify, I think, all the needs, the local needs in order to fill the gaps in, knowledges, local knowledges in terms of characterizing ecosystems and sorry, because I have memories all I said. And for the second question, who should PANGEA capacity building effort focus on? I think it can be focused on local actors like agencies, ministries, communities, and also universities, because all those stakeholders participate to the local data production. But it's really important to identify what really mean by capacity building, what's the possibilities of capacity building in the context of PANGEA. Thank you.
Um,
5 minutes, so we're gonna start wrapping up.
okay, I'm not going to be long. My name is David Kenfak. I work for the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. My point that I want to make here is that, to talk about capacity building, we ought to know exactly what we want to achieve, we need to think about whether or not we want to have a sustainable program. So when if I want to build on the example that we have in Forest Geo, when we go to a certain locality, we know that we'll need people who will be identifying the plant forever. We generally establish our program for long. So we train local people who are able to identify plants. And then we know that we need scientists who are going to continue the program, because all for us is about sustainability. We build the capacity of scientists who are associated to the plot. We build the capacity of locals that are trained, that are identifying plants. And then for what we were talking about, brain drain, we don't actually, we don't train PhD or master, but what we do is we associate we make MOU with local universities, and where I don't know who was talking about it, but we try to bring our capacity to local universities in countries. Anyway, so that's how we do capacity. But we emphasize also on bringing postdoctoral fellows. So I just want to emphasize that capacity building should be multi-level.
Thank you. My name is Junior. I am from Democratic Republic of Congo, and I mostly work for wildlife conservation. So my question is to Michael. Knowing that South America, they do speak Spanish, how did you handle the language issue? Because if I'm saying that I'm from a French country, and what I've noticed is that the Francophone countries, they have limited access to many of things we speak in conservation. I'm part of the National Geographic Explorer Group, and you can see that those countries, like central countries, most of them, they speak French, and they're really underrepresented. Why? Not because there is no smart people or there is no key people who can do stuff, but just because they're limited, because they can't speak English. So how did you handle that, and how PANGEA will go beyond that issue? And the second thing I had in mind, just be aware, I'm glad that Elsa knows a bit about Africa, but as you move from country to country, you also have like completely different situations. Like in Congo, I'm so sorry to say, but it's the truth. You can still have money that you put in capacity building in those big institutions. We call them big fish. They have money, and the money that rich, really the one that they need to benefit from the money. So just to make sure that you have to be careful, flexible. Who do you target from who? Because some of those people, some of those institutions, they are in the offices. They don't know anything about the ground. I'm lucky that I worked for an NGO who really has activities on the ground. So I know the world, how it works. And I also say, oh, my government. But sorry. Thank you.
The really simple answer is we learned each other's languages. Each side invested, and a lot of the researchers who worked in Brazil for years learned Portuguese, and the Brazilian researchers learned English, including senior colleagues who started LBA speaking English in a faulty way or relatively little. By the end of the program, we're giving talks at international meetings. So it was learning by doing, and it worked. I mean,
Sandra, one more comment, and then we'll go to Elsa.
Hi, I'm Sandra Duran, Colorado State University. I'll make it quick so everyone is tired. I think I was just thinking in the brain drain because I'm living here. I'm come from the tropics. So how can we stop that? And as the LBA experience show that probably has deeper roots, but I think there are some frameworks that we should at least maybe down the road when we identify those super sites, we can start working with critical actors like policymakers, identify those key stakeholders. Like we should also focus capacity building on that. Kind of like the CMS, that program that NASA has here. I think that infrastructure that you actually identify the key stakeholders that are going to continue that program and showing the policymakers that actually remote sensing is kind of like a powerful tool, right? And we can create this platform where they can help make decisions. Because I think the science in our countries are still like, or the policymakers are not still linked to the science that we are producing because they are not understanding well how they can use the tools to actually monitor carbon or carbon accounting programs. Like I think with carbon is like such a powerful tool that can connect many different policymakers specifically. And that's how maybe these jobs can be created so people can actually stay.
Thank you all so much. I'm gonna wrap us up because we are at the end of the day, a packed day at that. We have been recording this. Have a lot of people who have been taking notes as well. Thank you all for the really valuable input and suggestions. Not just in this session, but in all the sessions so far today. We have 1.5 more packed days where we can continue the conversation. I just want to kind of end on a couple key points that I think are important. We need to be honest and realistic about what something like PANGEA can achieve, but then we've also heard really hopeful reminders that even small things can have ripple effects and make a big difference. So with that kind of hopeful approach in mind, balanced with the need to really be realistic and recognize that it's different from one country, even within one country to the next, there's real challenges that something like PANGEA is confronted with. But I think if we can put down on paper something that is truly feasible, there's massive opportunity. So I just want to thank you all again for sticking with us through the end of the day. And please enjoy your evening. We'll pick back up tomorrow at 9 a.m., but there will be coffee and refreshments out at 8 a.m. And hopefully for those staying at the hotel nearby, there will be power. It was a weird kind of moment this morning for many folks coming from countries that have intermittent power to be in Washington, D.C. and not have power. So hopefully that's back on. But truly, thank you all for sticking around. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning.